Brothers in Media, the bros who know with Scott and Craig Colby. We are giving you the tools so that you can make media make sense. You think businesses could use a little free publicity, but according to business reporters, that's not the case. So what are businesses trying to hide from the public?
In a time when one of the biggest stories in the world is the rising prosperity gap between the rich and the poor, and the United States implementation of tariffs, business reporting has never been more important. But business reporting can be notoriously difficult.
So how do you report on business effectively? We've got an expert guest to tell us how it's done. But first, Scott Colby is a journalist with 36 years of experience as a reporter, columnist, editor, photographer, and designer, as well as being a national best-selling author and the coach and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. You can visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet on how to write effective op-eds. Scott is not a business reporter.
And he's Craig Colby, who has spent 37 years in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer and author and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company. Craig is not a business reporter, although he does have a business degree. But our guest today is a business reporter. His name is Dave Parkinson. He's reported on business for the Globe and Mail, Canada's national newspaper, for more than 20 years. That's 2 decades for people who can't do the math. And he's here to give us the inside scoop. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Scott and Craig. Pleasure to join you guys. And, well, I'll give you as inside as I can get. We're actually in the newsroom, as you can see. Little glance behind me, but yeah, we're in the Globe and Mail newsroom as we speak. So I'll tell you what I know.
You can call out the door if there is an answer that you don't know. You have access to experts right there.
Yeah,
so let's go.
This is in fact the report on business reporters are directly behind me. So
awesome. So actually what I started with came out of a conversation, the pre-interview that I had with you, is talking about how reluctant businesses are to be reported on. So as a business reporter for 25 years, when you approach businesses to do a story on them, how did they respond to that?
Yeah, it's gotten a lot harder, Craig. Honestly, like probably the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, businesses we used to be the conduit for them to get their message out. You know, Twitter and other social media, you know, Facebook, wherever, has become a much more direct way for them to get reach their audience as directly as possible. At some point, they decided that we were inhibiting their ability to control their message, which is frankly our job. I mean, we're not trying to have them control their message. We're trying to tell the truth as close as we can get to it. But their version of the truth and our version clash, and they have become very, very much more controlling on access, on really any attempt we make to cover their story immediately runs into opposition. And they have the big corporations in this country and all other countries at this point have enormous communications departments and a large number of people in those departments. Their job is really to block and then critique anything that's written about them, to the point where, frankly, business reporters are routinely frustrated by the effectively harassment they get from corporations they're just trying to cover.
That sounds like your job is the business reporter's job is incredibly important and difficult to do. I have one brief story. I was in the early days of Discovery Channel. I was covering how the internet was going to be a place for business. And I remember going in to do an interview with one of the technologists, and in the room across the way was the PR person. And I knew what they wanted to say. So I asked that question first to get it out of the way. And the technologist answered the question and then looked over at the PR person. The PR person nodded, and then we could get on with the interview. It was like, hit that message track. And I'll add one more thing for anybody watching right now live. We're live. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will get them to Dave.
Yeah, and I think Craig, that's that's more and more the case. That's, and I would say when that really started to take hold was in the when the financial crisis hit in what was that, about 15 years ago. The A lot of the information that we used to get directly from corporate sources, especially I have been an economics reporter for most of my professional career. I was sort of in between an investment in economics back at that period, so I was writing some about the markets and some about the economic fallout of that crisis. But the access to the information, we used to get mountains of economic research from the major banks on both sides of the border. When that crisis hit, all of a sudden they said, this is proprietary information. This is for our clients only. You no longer have access to our expertise, which, that was a major change. And in fact, there were senior economists at some of the biggest banks in North America who actually left their jobs. There's a guy by the name of Dave Rosenberg. He's a Canadian, but he was the chief economist at Merrill Lynch in New York at the time. And Dave actually left Merrill Lynch because he felt he was being muzzled publicly. And he moved back to Toronto and has worked in a couple of different shops here in Toronto ever since. But he felt that it was his duty as a market economist to communicate this information to the market. His employers felt that was proprietary information for clients, and mostly for high wealth clients and corporate clients. And therefore, his ability to communicate through the media became stifled. There were a couple of others who had a similar experience and decided that they just wanted to be able to actually get their voice out there. But yeah, it's been steady as the technology has increased, as these sources have been able to communicate their own message unfiltered by the media. That's been their preference, and it's certainly been their boss's preference. Is really more the case. The individuals are often happy to talk to us. It's their communications people and their employers who aren't. The flip side of that too is that the people behind me on a daily basis, when they write a story, especially about large companies in the Canadian financial sector, the banks, they will get calls on every story they write after it's published saying, we think this was wrong. We think that was characterized incorrectly. We'd like you to change that. And it's a daily battle basically with them. And I believe their goal is to wear us down. They don't expect us to run corrections on this stuff, but they do think that they are going to sort of shape our coverage and make us sort of self-censor to try to avoid those phone calls.
So how do you get to the truth?
Well, I think obviously you keep asking questions. You try to like in most media, you try to build a thick skin and not be bothered by those calls from their PR department saying we don't like what you said about us. You bulletproof yourself by being right. Research and research more. Make sure that you fully understand what you're writing about before you write it, and then you can defend yourself. I think we also find that we're telling a lot more stories, frankly, that aren't corporate stories, that are human stories about the effect of business and finance and economics on everyday people, on their everyday lives. So I think those stories are emerging and are frankly more interesting in a lot of ways. I mean, we're still going to cover Bay Street. We're still going to cover major corporate news. But more and more, we want to give people stories about how economic developments are affecting them, or affecting their personal lives, or affecting their families' lives, personal finance approaches, so that we can tell stories that resonate more with individuals and maybe less so strictly with investors.
So with corporations, they still have to file public documents for investors.
Yep.
That hasn't gone away, right?
Yep.
You still have access to that, but that's only quarterly usually.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they'll file quarterly financial reports. Annual reports have a wealth of information in them. There are other filings that they have to make routinely any change in business type of developments, anything that, as the market would call it, material, anything that might affect the value of the stock has to be reported. So all press releases are publicly available, and there are websites that reporters go to where these just exist. They're the regulators, the Securities Commission, Ontario Securities Commission in Ontario, but similar securities commissions across the country. There's basically, a sort of a public domain where all of this stuff is collected and is pretty easily searchable. Right. So that hasn't changed. And obviously,
filings, you're not getting any cooperation or little cooperation.
No, there's not a great deal. I mean, there's a tendency to get it. Corporations have become a lot like the government. Their communications is very, very structured, and is often, you sort of get the non-statement statement when you ask for you want to comment on these numbers that we found in your latest quarterlies, and you'll get something very bland and not really helpful. That's increasingly a tendency.
Yeah, I've heard of reporters saying that they reach out to these companies, not just financial companies, but just companies in Canada in general, probably the US too, and they say we will respond with a press release.
Yeah.
Right? So they won't even give you an interview directly.
And I mean, obviously when you're dealing with something breaking and something that's going to embarrass them, they're going to try to kill your scoop. So the way they kill your scoop is, instead of actually commenting when you're about to publish the story, they put out a press release and try to preempt you.
Right.
There's not a lot you can do about that. I think ultimately, like, if you're, it's like anything. You want to talk to the people who actually know something, and right. The problem is the communications departments. And we've had people who work in professional communications come in and talk to our newsroom. And basically their point is that even for them, the job has become harder because they used to have access to the senior executives. And now they are even the communications department is several steps removed from the actual people who actually know stuff. Mm. So when they don't tell us anything, it's partly because they don't know anything. They're not really there to communicate anymore. They're there to sort of, they're more of a branch of marketing in a lot of ways. Right. I mean, the reporters, once they've been working on a beat for years, obviously their goal is to bypass those communications people and have direct access to the senior executives. And a lot of them do. And, once you've got somebody you actually have a relationship and trusts your work. And ultimately that's the bottom line. If you want to actually get the information, there's got to be trust there. They've got to know that you are not going to burn them. And they got to know that you're going to be, you'll be tough but fair. And so, and then you start getting access to the senior executives who can actually give you the information and will actually go on the record and will actually, go to their communications people and say, no, this person I want to talk to because they're, it's in our best interest to do so.
So with the media looking for more interesting and, quite frankly, easier stories to tell, the economic stories you talked about, and we'll get to that in a little bit, and the barriers to access to information that are being put up by the big corporations, how much are people missing of the stories that they need to know about what's going on with these big corporations?
It's kind of hard. How do you measure how much you don't know? It's a difficult question. I think if you're a very active investor, I think you probably know what you need to know to be safe, to have your investments be relatively safe. I think that, certainly publicly traded companies still are required to disclose enough information that you can trust that your money is secure. Investments made in things that aren't publicly traded, that aren't subject to that sort of regulatory oversight, I'd be a little nervous about. There are, you hear about investments every day that promise high returns that are outside of the regulatory structure and don't have that same kind of quarterly reporting requirements. Sort of fairly new investment inventions that people come up with. They're often tied to real estate, but not exclusively. But basically, if it's not being regulated, you want to be a very sophisticated and frankly wealthy investor to start messing around with them. And I think we've learned that when you look at some of the stories that the Globe and Mail has broken about, sort of fraudulent investment schemes. Invariably the people who are most hurt are people who shouldn't have been investing in the first place. That this was not an investment that made any sense to them. All they saw the figures, they saw the promise of big returns. But it's like, if I'm investing my retirement savings, I don't want to be messing around with this stuff that's really aimed at very sophisticated and wealthy investors. And so, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Go ahead, Greg.
The crypto scares the hell out of me. There's
I
somebody I know who invests in it and follows it really closely and said, boy, 20 minutes a day, you do your research, you can do it. I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Well, and I don't know how great the report, how great do you think the reporting has been on what's going on in crypto?
I mean, there's been a lot of good reporting. That I don't think there's been great reporting because, again, a lot of this stuff is under the radar. It's like crypto is not. There are some crypto companies that are publicly traded, but the actual underlying asset it's fairy dust. I mean, it's nothing. It's air. It's air that has value because somebody else attributed value to it. And so if one person's willing to sell the air and another person's willing to buy it, then I guess it has value. But I mean, crypto is not. It's not a thing. It's. I mean, I know it exists. Yeah. I know people trade it, but it's not like there's no physical asset underlying most of crypto. It's code. So what's code worth? Like I would say nothing personally. And so I wouldn't go anywhere near it. But I'm not here to give investment advice. That's not what I do. But honestly, yeah, that stuff is just, and it's like, there's a reason why we're seeing various, crypto organizations simply collapse into nothing and their owners disappear. It's because there was nothing there in the first place. They were basically scams. Doesn't mean they all are. Doesn't mean Bitcoin is a scam, but Bitcoin still doesn't have a physical asset underlying it. So
it's like non-fungible tokens. I'm not paying for a pixel.
Yeah, and see how long those lasted, right? I mean, it's just that was just another version of kind of the same thing. So
yeah, my favorite story about Bitcoin, that type of thing, is the guy, I forget, I think he was out from out west, and the entire system was on his laptop, right? And then he died, and no one had access to his computer. No one had the code, and all this millions and billions of dollars was just lost on some guy's laptop because no one knew the passcode. Just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, and again, that's not an investment as far as I'm concerned. That's go to Vegas and gamble if you want to do that. Right. And lots of people do, and lots of people enjoy it. But
so that's the role of obviously people like yourself, right? Business reporters to try and pull back the curtain and let people you can make your own decisions, right? If you want to be a fool with your money, right, then so be it. But
yeah. No, and you know what? I started my career at the Globe. I started my career as an oil and gas reporter in Calgary, my first job at the Globe. But not long after that, I became part of the investment team. And I spent a lot of years writing about the markets and writing about investing. And I asked to be transferred out of that and into something else because I felt increasingly uncomfortable with the demands to give people investment advice. Right. To say you should do this, you should not do that is a really dangerous. I'm not even sure professional financial advisors are fully qualified to do that kind of thing. They think they are. But there's 6 different answers. If somebody says, what should I, where should I put this $10,000? I can give you like probably 12 ideas, but I shouldn't, how do you pick one? So that wasn't a job I wanted to do anymore. And yes, there is stuff like earlier in my career, pre-Globe, I was working out in Vancouver for Dow Jones at the time, the owners of the Wall Street Journal, and Bre-X was the big Canadian story at the time.
Yeah.
And, I was working for a commodities service of Dow Jones, and Bre-X was a gold company. And so I couldn't help but cover a little bit of Bre-X. And, at the time it's like, this just sounds too good to be true. And I think a lot of reporters started asking that question, but I wasn't a particularly sophisticated business reporter at the time. And I just figured Bre-X couldn't possibly be as good a story as they were saying. I didn't think they were a total scam. I had no knowledge of that, but I was starting to write stories that said, where I was talking to people saying, these claims, I've never seen a hole in the ground that has this much gold. I would be skeptical. But yeah, I mean, it's I don't know. They're just, there's so many pitfalls out there when you start.
For those who don't know, how did that Bre-X wind up?
So Bre-X was a Canadian-based gold mining company that had a property in, I want to say, Indonesia. It's been 30 something years.
Indonesia or the Philippines.
I think it was like Borneo or something. But anyway,
it was down in South Asia.
But yeah, and they kept on coming back with just incredible results from their sampling of their property, and the value of the stock was going through the roof. And then a very large international mining company got involved as a major investor to actually develop their mine, and started looking at their sample results and saying, I don't think these are real. And it turned out they were utterly fraudulent. They were literally dropping gold out of their pockets onto the ground so that they could have a sample that was full of gold. And the company collapsed, and there were all kinds of fraud charges. And there was a geologist who fell out of a helicopter, who may or may not have slipped. It was a really fascinating story, but it was one of the biggest scandals, and certainly one of the biggest scandals in Canadian business history. Yeah. And but yeah, an awful lot of people were looking at that company and trying not to. I mean, it was a little tiny company in Canada that gained international recognition, and it was hard not to cheerlead. You had to really be careful not to be saying, "Yay us, yay Canada," and actually look at what they were doing.
So, do you think lessons have been learned from that? I mean, I'm pretty old. You're pretty old. Craig's pretty old when it comes to being in the business nearly 40 years. With young people coming up, do you think these lessons are being learned about to be a little more diligent?
I think there's a gap. Like, a lot of this stuff gets learned simply through conversations with people who are old, right? I mean, we like to think we're valuable, but I do think there's a genuine value in a newsroom that has a mix of ages and a mix of experiences, to have those conversations and have people saying, you know what, you gotta, we've seen stuff like this before. Make sure you ask the right questions. You just have to have those kinds of conversations with colleagues and with senior editors who have that kind of institutional knowledge. I think that in Canadian media in general, there is a gap in the middle of that. That's just kind of, newsrooms have closed. People aren't physically in them in a lot of cities. Yeah. They're working remotely from home. The physical newsroom is gone. The other newsrooms that are still around are much smaller than they used to be. Maybe people are only coming in a couple of days a week. That's our requirement here, is to be in at least 2 days a week. I think most people are in more than that. But again, it's like, we don't have as many conversations. We don't have as many learning grounds for young reporters to be able to develop those sorts of skills and that sort of feel for things that we used to. I mean, sort of a lot of the mid-market papers are gone. A lot of the small market, almost all the small market papers are gone. And so, from that standpoint, and obviously broadcasts have shrunk a lot too. So The places where we learned all of that stuff from the people around us, a lot of that has fallen away. And so I do worry, especially about people who are sitting at home working on their laptop and for a daily paper, that they can put together a competent story, but the lack of, they're just going to lack that sophistication to be prepared for those sorts of surprises.
Right.
A common theme on this podcast is the migration of eyeballs to podcasts, to little news hits on TikTok or Instagram Reels, and the lack of oversight and training that goes into those reports. We all get sent little reels, at least I do, about things that are happening, particularly politically. And I always wonder, would that have cut the muster at a big news organization?
Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely an issue in terms of news consumers. I think there's also a gap in their level of sophistication, as they have 1,000 little snippets to grab, but we no longer demand as much attention of them as we used to. Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm thrilled with the direction that information sharing has gone. I like the fact that people can consume a tremendous amount of information on a daily basis, and in a lot of cases they do. People are reading an awful lot now, probably more than they have in years. Unfortunately, a lot of what they're reading is poorly produced. It's produced cheaply. It's now being produced by non-human sources, and it's just the quality has gone down, but I think the appetite has gone up. So I think there's an opportunity there, if it can be captured right. I think the audience is there. We just need the audience to actually, I guess, want to be smarter.
I'm constantly surprised at how charmingly written the AI copy is for the scam emails I get about things. They really have personality, which is why I don't believe them. I want to ask one more thing, because we alluded to it earlier. You talked about the difference in economic reporting and the kind of stories you can tell there. Can you give me an example of the type of economic reporting and kind of story you can get out and you've hunted in the past?
Yeah. Oh, sure. And yeah, I mean, to sort of tie that back with what we were just talking about too, the fact that the basic information is available immediately and widely means that the kind of story that we would have written in our business section 20 years ago, we don't write anymore. The sort of bland, here's the corporation's, what they announced in their press release about their takeover, or here's the company's quarterly earnings. We don't do very many of those because they've been commodified. They are very easily obtained from other sources, and there's not a lot we can add. So our reporting then becomes, okay, well, what's the story behind the numbers? And once you start thinking about what's the story behind the numbers, it opens up all kinds of things. And I mean, I can think of probably the first story that I did, the first sort of big weekend feature that I wrote for the Globe, or co-wrote for the Globe. I had written a story about a Bank of Canada report. I'm trying to remember if it was, I don't remember exactly what kind of Bank of Canada report it was, but it was they do periodic sort of economic updates, and it was one of those. And it talked about, and this would have been around the time, this would have been maybe around 2011, 2012, and sort of the aftermath of the financial crisis. And they talked about the potential for the Canadian economy to rebound after the downturn. And they noted that there was a handful of industries where they did not actually see capacity for them to grow back to where they were before, because plants had been permanently shut down. The physical capacity for those sectors of the economy to rebound had declined. And I wrote this story, and sort of a one paragraph in my story that said a whole bunch of other things that talked about that. And one of my colleagues walked over and he said, could you show me in that report where it says that? And I showed him the line, and he noted that one of the sectors that had basically shrunk permanently was the forest products industry. And he said, I think there's a really good story we could do about that. And we ended up having 3 reporters, 3 different parts of the country, gathering information on the ground from communities where the plant had shut forever. Where there was a pulp and paper plant, newsprint plants. I mean, our own industry was a big part of that story. A lot of lumber plant, a lot of lumber production facilities that had been sort of small family-owned places that just they didn't have the size anymore to continue to exist. But anyway, we ended up doing a story across the country that was a big weekend splash that we put out about how essentially the forest products industry had died, and it was taking dozens of small communities with it. And that came from like a single sentence in a report. I had another one I did a few years after that where I discovered that Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, had the highest per capita rate of immigration of any city in Canada. And I was just curious. I started looking at immigration data, and I found this number, and I thought it never would have occurred to me. I would have thought Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, but it was Charlottetown. I think the next biggest was actually there's this small city in Manitoba that is the next biggest, and I can't remember what it was, or at least it was at the time. But again, I just walked up to my editors and I said, Charlottetown's a pretty small city, and this is pretty huge immigration. It was like 5% a year of its population. It was a big number. And this was about 2018, I think. And we ended up writing a story that essentially said that Charlottetown had become kind of a laboratory for what the entire country might be looking at, which is an attempt to replace an aging population, an aging and slow growing population with growth through immigration, and what effect would that have on the community? And it turned out that that's the story that the entire country has been living for the past 3 or 4 years. It just so happened that we spotted a number in a report. So,
well, that's what gives me hope about the industry, even though it's shrinking, is 1 reporter, 2 reporters, a good editor. We can still dig in and make a difference. We can still get information just through old-fashioned reporting and talking to people in real life and showing initiative. So that's one thing that I as a journalist for 40 years, I still hold on to.
Well, and I hope, and this is what I hope that we will find ways to continue to share those instincts and develop those instincts with younger reporters who, as I said, are not physically in a newsroom as often as they used to be, and when they are, not in newsrooms that are as big. When we talk about AI, you talk about those sort of instincts and honing those instincts and capitalizing on them. And we do hope, while we see AI as obviously a threat, because when we're not doing what we do well, AI could do it almost as well as us for a much better price. But when we do it well, obviously we still expect that for many years the human touch and the fact that we are asking human questions and have human curiosity will set that apart. But the other thing AI will do is the kind of data searches that I just talked about to try to unearth that information can be done in seconds rather than hours or days or even weeks.
Yeah.
So when you start wondering those things as a reporter, with an intelligent search request, you can get almost instant information that can lead to much quicker and much deeper reporting on that sort of data. So, and especially from a business and economic reporter standpoint, the potential for that is pretty enticing.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience with us, as we hope will continue in many newsrooms around the country. For Scott and I, this is the part of the show where we promote our books. Scott,
yes,
we're getting right to the crass stuff at the end.
There you go. My writing guide, How to Be a Better Writer. That's what you think. Available on Amazon.
And The Unqualified Hockey Coach and Stories of Springsteen, True Love, and How to Be Utopian, also available on Amazon. It's getting terrific reviews. And you can also find the award-winning, we talked about that earlier before we came on, all caps Stories That Justify an Outrageous Hat collection. And if you enjoy the conversations with us, I'm sure you'll enjoy the books as well. Dave, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. It's a tough gig you have.
Thanks, guys. Happy to come on and talk anytime, and it's been a pleasure. Take care.
Keep on doing what you're doing.
Thank you. I'll do my best.
Need it.